field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing songs and they carrying signs, mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Robust Opposition. This is the show where we bring you the voice of resistance, organizing to fight corporate oligarchy in Washington, our state capitals, and on the streets. I'm your co-host, Lauren Steiner, activist and organizer. I was the lead organizer of Los Angeles for Bernie, now Our Revolution Los Angeles. With me is my co-host, Lily Starling, who is an activist, a business owner, and a farmer. And we have a special guest this week as our co-host is my friend, Steve Horn. Steve is a writer for dsmogblog.com, and he's a freelance investigative journalist whose work has appeared in the Intercept, Vice News, Al Jazeera America, In These Times, Let'sRun.com, a whole bunch of other publications. We've got an exciting show for you today. We're going to be talking about the subject that's in the news, and that is fake news. What is fake news? Who is practicing fake news? How can we determine fake news? We've got a bunch of great guests who are also writers themselves. And in the first segment, we're going to be speaking with Carl Gibson, who is the co-publisher of USUncut.com, which is a digital media company launched in 2015 to counter corporate media narratives. USUncut.com ranks among the top 100 mobile websites in the US, and it reaches over 20 million people a month. We also have Caitlin Johnstone. Well, I'm sorry, the next person I want to introduce, because he's going to be in the first segment with us, is John Matthew Laurits, who is a citizen journalist, poet, math enthusiast, and as he likes to say, failing novelist, I would say budding novelist, who blogs at www.johnlaurits.com. And then we're going to be bringing in Caitlin Johnstone, who is joining us from Australia, where it is 4 in the morning there. She is a writer for Newslog. She's the first victim of fake news, and she'll talk about why that is. Political junkie, relentless feminist, and champion of the 99%. Let's see, who else do we have? We have, oh my gosh, this is such a great show. We have Walker Bragman, and he is a progressive journalist, columnist, and cartoonist whose writings can be found on www.pastemagazine.com. Our activist profile this week will be with Bob Fitrakis, who is an election protection author and activist made famous for all his work uncovering the shenanigans in Ohio in 2004, and he was Jill Stein's lawyer in her recent recount. So we'll be talking about that at the end of the show. So without any further to do, I would like to introduce Carl Gibson, who is going to talk about fake news and how this term first came into our lexicon. And then we're going to go to John to talk about his article on the new blacklist and this prop op or not. What I keep getting it wrong. Anyway, take it away, Carl.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Lauren and Lily and everyone else. This is a great panel, and I'm glad to be on it. Yeah. So this is a new conversation in 2016 political vocabulary, but fake news has actually been around for well over a century. People who have read The Emperor Has No Clothes by Jack Herer will know that, about 100 or so years ago, there was a big scaremongering campaign headed by William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper tycoon, who propagated something that was fake news by today's standards. It's called yellow journalism then. And it was basically done on behalf of the petrochemical pharmaceutical companies to cast marijuana and hemp as this horrible demon drug that would make people go into conniption fits and make your daughters run off with jazz musicians. And obviously that's fake news, but it played a role in, even today, the DEA has marijuana scheduled as a Schedule 1 drug, which is in the same category as heroin and cocaine. So that's the impact of fake news and bad information. Fake news by today's standards is, it's a pejorative term, I would argue, used mainly by the corporate media to besmirch their competition in independent media. But actually, fake news is a problem. There are sites like abcnews.com.co. It's meant to look like ABC News' website, and it runs false headlines. That's obviously fake news. And you could also argue that that the Washington Post propagated fake news in the lead up to the Iraq War by recklessly propagating the myth that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda, both of which were later proven false. So fake news it's basically something that, in earnest, it's good to talk about it and to try to confront it, but it's right now being used to plaster a large segment of independent media, which is necessary for political discourse in a democratic society, as fake. And so now, because most media is distributed on social media, particularly Facebook, where there's over 1 billion users, now it's kind of a witch hunt, McCarthy-esque type effort to basically bully people into sharing links only from corporate media sources. And everyone who shares independent media is then bullied by their friends and by armchair political pundits that, they're propagating fake news irresponsibly. And so now there's this huge problem where the only media that's getting shared on social media now is largely from outlets that have recklessly propagated fake news in the past, like Washington Post, like NBC News, like the New York Times. And so we really need a push now to really revive independent journalism for social media, and for people to stop being so afraid of the McCarthy witch hunt against independent media.
Steve, why don't we go to you so you can talk about, since Carl kind of just gave a really great lead in to what the mainstream media is doing. Why don't you talk about that piece you're working on right now?
Yeah. So Carl, good to be on air with you. Carl,
yeah, likewise.
In the past, trying to do some real news. We did an investigation together a few years ago that went global, and still really proud of, on related to Stratfor and using WikiLeaks as a tool for our research. But to get to sort of talk about this a little more, I'm working on a story right now on sort of this whole fake news incident that happened about a decade ago. It's probably not something that a lot of millennials are following, because a lot of millennials were in their teenage years at the time, and I didn't know about it at the time, but started looking into it recently. And that is that about 10 years ago, the Center for Media and Democracy did a long sort of a year-long investigation on fake news. You can go to you could Google it. You go Center for Media and Democracy fake news. But the fake news that they were looking into was corporate fake news. This was on local media outlets. This was on all across the country. They found 77 incidents of the corporate local news airing literally fake news. That is, it came in the form of basically advertorials. That is, things that looked like news packages that were basically repackaged PR pieces that were actually made by public relations firms on behalf of their corporate clients that then went to air. People watched them and thought that they were watching a local news segment, but it was actually made by a corporate PR firm. And so not only that, but there was, during the Bush administration had got caught many times instigating fake news, not only for weapons of mass destruction, but also there was a huge scandal that the mainstream media barely covered that was uncovered by the New York Times a decade ago as well, in which they were sending pundits on TV, on national outlets across the country, that the people would see across the country and across the world. These were seemingly independent military pundits who were actually on the payroll of military contractors and on contract with the Pentagon. The New York Times won a Pulitzer Prize for it, but guess what? Even though this was the mainstream media actually doing the reporting, the rest of the mainstream media didn't pick up on this story. And a lot of these people still appear on TV today, including a guy by the name of Barry McCaffrey. If you watch MSNBC, you'll often see him paraded around. Anytime there's a military flare-up, they'll be on TV. He was one of the people covered in this story. He's on the payroll of military contractor companies. So this still exists. These same people are still around, giving us quote unquote sort of independent analysis of what's going on in the military, what's going on in terms of the U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, they're all on the MSNBC. I don't watch a lot of CNN, but they're all on there, and they never disclose their employment contracts with these corporations, and they're spouting the corporate line. The other interesting thing relating to that is during the Bush administration, the Washington Post started running articles by a supposed news service called the Fiscal Times. And it turns out that the Fiscal Times was a project of the Peterson Institute. And Pete Peterson, the chairman of Blackstone Group, has been waging a 30-year war to get rid of Social Security. So this was, actually it wasn't during the Bush administration, it was during the time when Obama was doing his grand bargain, and he had the Simpson-Bowles Commission. And that whole thing was designed to cut entitlement programs to balance the budget. So this was probably around 2011. And fortunately, the Occupy movement changed the national conversation from the phony issue of the deficit to the real issue of income and wealth inequality. Anyway, we now have John Laurits on with us. Hi, John.
Hello.
I'd like you to talk about your latest article on your own blog about the new blacklist, because you can introduce people to how this became a real thing a few weeks ago when the Washington Post wrote that McCarthyite piece on this prop or not. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the Intercept also picked up on this this piece by the Washington Post, in which they totally uncritically just repeated the claims on this website propornot.com, or is it propaganda or not? These people who claim to be a team of like researchers with foreign policy experience, with all these different, I don't have the quote in front of me, but they're actually anonymous. No one is named. I even ran searches on who owns the website, and no one knows who they are. But Washington Post picks up on them and introduces them as all these experts, you know, and represents them as such in their article, and links to their blacklist of over 200 different like independent news outlets, which included I mean, there were some, you know, that were kind of far out there, like aliens and, you know, that kind of news. But there was also Truthdig, who Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! Writes articles for Truthdig. Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, you know, wrote for the New York Times for years. Apparently he's Russian propaganda. And so this website calls all these people out, all these websites, many of which are good, Naked Capitalism, Jack Pine radicals, like, you know, activist forums online, and accuses them of being Russian propaganda. And then we have the Washington Post, this, you know, pretty well-read outlet, republishing this crap and saying that it's experts. Experts have determined that all these websites are Russian propaganda, you know, are confirmed Russian propaganda. And so now there's going to be, you know, all of Washington Post readers who are skimming through this article. You know, if they follow this link, and if they don't look into it, you know, they don't have the time to look into it, they're gonna think that all these independent news outlets are now Russian propaganda. So we have the media like stoking this anti-Russian, you know, anti-socialist, new red scare here.
Yeah, and apparently the description that you were looking for is they call themselves a nonpartisan collection of researchers with foreign policy, military, and technology backgrounds, but not one single individual or organization is actually named. And the dangerous thing about them is they're calling for the FBI and the Department of Justice to do formal investigations of these news sites that you've named, and further that our government should take putative measures or that against our government. Oh boy, that doesn't sound right. I don't know what I was writing last night. It was midnight. But you've also investigated this, Carl. What have you come up with about that shady organization?
Yeah, it was like John was saying. The executive director of Propernaut that Washington Post interviewed was never named in the piece, and the reason that he gave was he was in fear of reprisal from Russian actors. So I mean, it was like McCarthyism times 20. And no one seemed to question it. And that's the danger of Washington Post, because they've won Pulitzers and they've broken big stories in the past, that they can get a pass on basically just repeating unsubstantiated garbage. Now, the Intercept actually blew the lid off this whole Propernaut thing. And John referenced the piece as well. But I think it's also, in addition to Propernaut, it's I would have to say, like, social media itself, like, we all need to do a better job fact checking what these big media companies tell us. Because if you'll read that piece now, that 3-week-old Washington Post piece, there's a really lengthy editor's note that's since been attached to that piece referencing Propernaut's work. And the editor's note basically distances the Washington Post from the list. They never retracted the story. They never issued an apology. But they basically said, we don't vouch for the validity of anything that Propernaut says. And it was only added after the Post was called out nearly unilaterally by everyone from Matt Taibbi from the Rolling Stone to the Intercept, other people. But the Washington Post never media remember the viral story. They don't remember the retractions. I mean, even if there was a retraction, the damage has been done to a lot of these media companies. And people like Eve Smith from Naked Capitalism, very well-respected, highly informative financial blog, she's actually threatened to sue the Washington Post, and not Propernaut, because she says Propernaut is not the one who made this list go viral. It's the Washington Post who did. So, I mean, I guess we'll see how that lawsuit turns out. But she's suing to be specifically named as not Russian propaganda because her reputation is.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk about Facebook right now, because Facebook is getting into this whole deal. They are now talking about how they're going to be fact-checking, labeling, and burying fake news. And the organizations that they have come up with to do this fact-checking are Snopes, ABC News, factcheck.org, PolitiFact, and the AP. And what's going to happen is they're not going to remove the fake news. They're going to bury it, and they're going to have a warning, which is going to tell people why this has been determined as fake news. And these fake news sites won't be able to sell, ads. So you posted about that, Carl. I wonder if you can speak to, because I know you have to get off in a few minutes. If you could speak to this Facebook thing. And also I've discovered that Soros is funding this, what they're calling the International Fact-Checking Network. Soros and Pierre Omidyar from eBay, Google, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and something called the National Endowment for Democracy.
Yeah, I haven't heard about the Soros thing, but it's interesting you mentioned his name with all those groups, because those are all very ardent Clinton supporters, and the neoliberal intelligentsia have all been kind of trumpeting this whole fake news thing ever since Trump lost. And I think, like, I was talking to my business partner Mark the other day about, like, the 5 stages of grief, right? And I think we're still in the stage of denial. There's like denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. I think a lot of the liberal elite are still in denial. I think they're in denial that Hillary Clinton lost because, largely because there were a multitude of issues, but I think mainly people were really upset that the Democratic Party trumpeted this quote unquote recovery that never touched 85% of the country, and are asking us to support another 4 to 8 years of the status quo, which is unsustainable for most everybody. And instead of accepting that that's the reason why people didn't want to vote for them, they're now blaming Vladimir Putin, they're blaming Russia, They're blaming fake news now. And all of this is kind of feeding into that unhealthy denial that's going on right now, the first stage of grief, and all the liberals grieving about a Donald Trump presidency. Certainly is a very dangerous thing, and I think we should all work to hold the Trump administration accountable. But I think we also need to come to terms with the fact that, we're now asking the same organizations that have been caught lying to people before from now ABC News has actually been on PolitiFact's Pundit Fact File, and they, out of the statements from ABC News that they rated, 58% were rated either half true, mostly false, or false. Snopes itself has been exposed as it's basically a married couple with no professional journalism experience running a website out of their home. They have a team of people, like 4 or 5 people who help fact check things around the country. But these are the organizations that Facebook is trusting to verify whether or not news is real or not. And it kind of harkens back to George Orwell's 1984. And there was a Ministry of Truth. And the Ministry of Truth was the organization that dictated what the news was to the people. Even if we were at war with East Asia, if it benefited the party to be at war with Eurasia, then we'd be at war with Eurasia, and East Asia would be our ally. And we all remember that part of 1984. But it's a dangerous, slippery slope that I think was rooted in good intentions, because there was a lot of really bogus links that went viral because people are just desperate to have their beliefs and opinions confirmed. But I think this is being applied to way more than just the bootleg right-wing blog sites that propagated, like Pizzagate conspiracy theories. I think this is now being applied to anyone who has been either labeled by Proper Not as Russian propaganda, or by that Hillary Clinton supporting media professor in Massachusetts who made that viral list of news sources that went viral after the election. The damage has been done, like I said earlier, to these media companies' reputations and brands. And so, they're media companies, just like everyone else. Occasionally a media company will get something wrong. But in the case of the Washington Post with the Proper Not story, their massive amount of wealth and newsrooms full of staff, they're able to just completely bury social media and content all day, every day. And independent media companies don't have the same resources they do. So the fake news thing, if we let it, will be the death of independent media on social media. And so I challenge everyone to please consume a wide variety of news sources from all parts of the political spectrum. And the news sources that continue to cite from reputable sources, that continue to put out content that is factual and correct and sourced, and that continue to stick around after the election is over, after the inauguration, after the midterm elections, those media companies that have that staying power, that continue to reach viewers and continue to put out factual information, those are the ones that we should trust, and not necessarily the corporate media or the opinion confirming partisan blogs, so to say.
I want to ask a question of you, Carl. Just sort of, you use Facebook a lot for promoting articles on usuncut.com. What's the danger? Is this sort of like a realization of the danger of using Facebook so much as like this one central node in which to promote content? And then the other related question is this sort of a double-edged sword solution to begin with? That is, that by these like mainstream media outlets doing this, don't they just sow more distrust in the general public about the fact that they're trying to hide the truth from people? Like that this could actually make the whole distrust problem even worse and more severe?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, we have I think the word that Webster made their word of the year this year was post-truth, which is, facts. Don't confuse me with the facts. I got my mind made up, right? So I think that defines a lot of not just Trump supporters, but Hillary Clinton supporters too. The ardent partisans who say, don't show me the WikiLeaks emails, right? Don't show me the Trump bragging about sexual assault tapes. I've got my mind made up. This is what I believe. And the lamestream media is full of lies. And so no matter how many people put a label on a story that says, the facts in the story are disputed, it really doesn't do much to break through the bubble that people have created for themselves in the news that they consume. And now, speaking to your question about Facebook, I think that's a very valid point. Our Facebook feeds are set up to give us what we want to see and to give us what we want to like and what we want to share. which are usually things that we agree with. Now, I think the main thing that we all try to do as journalists is to inform people. And that usually means that telling them things that they don't know or that they don't know that they want. And so it's our job to not only get people to read our articles and to get information from us, but to also give them the information that they don't know they want. And so Facebook, their algorithms, the way they're set up, the pages that we like, the content that we share, the content that we comment on, that's the content that we see in our news feeds. And so we're really reinforcing our own ideological bubbles. And so I would like somehow for us to kind of break out of that Facebook bubble and for there to be more information distribution sources. Right now, I don't see anything beyond Facebook. I know Twitter is sort of doing that, but even Twitter now to a point is changing their algorithm to put the most popular and most highly engaged tweets at the top rather than the most timely. So, I mean, all social media is working to give us what we want, not necessarily what we need. And so I don't know what the solution is really. I mean, people don't really type in the names of websites into the URL bar anymore. They usually log into Facebook and see what the news is on their feed.
Yeah, I know. I mean, people actually use me to curate their, I can't tell you how many people have said they use me to curate their news every day, which is a pretty heavy responsibility. So that's why I try to look at the sources, not just the websites where they come from. Well, I really want to get Caitlin on now because she is a victim of this whole Facebook scrubbing. So I got to let you go, Carl. I know you have to go at 10:30 anyway, but I've really enjoyed having you on, and I'd love to have you on again.
It was great to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Okay. So while we wait for Caitlin to join back in, does anyone have anything they want to say? John, you haven't spoken in a bit. Do you have any comment on what Carl was just speaking about?
Well, I did want to throw out there, this is something, because it's a kind of a complex issue, and I don't think there's any quick solutions to, so there being totally fake news circulating is a problem, sometimes. But I think we need to pump the brakes a little bit on blaming social media, or not that he blamed social media, but just that we need to be careful not to cross that line. Because I do think that social media, including Facebook and Twitter, do have a lot of potential. I mean, with the Sanders campaign, for instance, I think the reason why it was so successful, the reason why such an insurgent message was able to come so close to getting the Democratic nomination was because we had, this kind of generation of millennial voters, which grew up with the internet that was driving it. And they, the internet is their native territory. And so social media, Twitter, Facebook, these are how they and we spread our news to that campaign. And so, it's a complicated issue, and I just wanted to point out that it's a double-edged thing. So on the one hand, you have the danger of fake news, going viral on social media, but on the other hand, social media seems to be kind of the democratization of journalism and of information, and so I think that we need to honor and appreciate and learn how to use that gift more effectively, as opposed to limiting its scope of expression. And so that was kind of a thought that popped up for me there.
Awesome. We're going to go, pardon me, to Katie Johnson now, from formerly a writer for Inquisitr. And technically she still is. She'll explain all that. But she was, as she says, gently fired from Inquisitr shortly after this Proper Not list came out, naming all these fake news sites. And I believe Inquisitr was one of the sites in the crosshairs. So essentially, a lot of these outlets have now been scrambling to make it under the, the bar of, legitimacy. And Katie is someone who is widely read. She's been writing all year about the Bernie Sanders movement. She's a fierce critic of the left and the right. She's written some really excellent pieces about just Obama's failure as a progressive, and essentially she's a very popular person that we've seen, and her articles being shared all year. Katie, tell us first, there's a couple things that happened to you, so why don't you tell us first about your writing with Inquisitr and what happened there?
Oh, well, it was going really well, and then it was actually the blacklist we got mentioned on. The Inquisitr got mentioned on. Melissa Zinder, I think, was the one who put that together. She was an associate professor from some university in Massachusetts, and she put together a list of outlets that she didn't believe were credible, and it went viral, and Inquisitr was on one of them. And there was a kind of a 1-2 punch, I think, for Inquisitr there. They also, Zuckerberg came out and started mooting the idea of this, putting an algorithm that would downgrade any fake news websites. So in order to save their brand, and because they're just an online publication, they started to kind of tighten things up a bit, which at the start was pretty good. They were just making sure that we were all checking our sources and not saying anything that wasn't verifiable. But then it started to get a little sticky, and I was asked more than once to tone it down, wind it back. And basically, they didn't want me to do daily rants, and they didn't want me to rant anymore. And ranting, that was pretty much all that was my thing. That was what I was doing. And so I talked it through with them at length, and there didn't seem to be any real kind of compromise other than pulling back my voice completely and becoming something that I wasn't. So although I'm still on the writers list there, I can't actually write how I wish to write. So that's why I was not technically fired. I was kind of gently fired, in a way that I think a lot of journalists, including my own father, found themselves just being muted. So, if you don't want to lose your job, then you should probably wind it back a little bit. And I wasn't prepared to do that. I didn't want to do that. So I moved my stuff to another outlet, a budding new one called Newslog. That was going okay until one day I was looking at my page on Facebook, and everything had disappeared. Every share of every article that I had written from Newslog going back in time just disappeared completely. And then I looked, on my personal page. I asked around. No one could find any of my articles anymore. And this Newslog had been added, of which I'm really the only writer, had been added to a malicious site list on Facebook. And so that we, thank you to all my readers. There was a furious campaign online very quickly. Pitchforks were bought out and we got ourselves back online. And so within an hour or so, so that was pretty cool. Turns out furious outrage does have its uses. It will get you back online. But since then I've had some very weird things happen with Facebook. My like button keeps appearing and disappearing on my page, and there will be this kind of feeling of being shadow banned, that there's some things just don't take off the way that you assume that they're going to. And there's things going on in the background at Facebook Central that I don't think any of us really actually know what they're doing there, but they are playing around, I think, with the algorithms already on how to mute. I'm not even news, I'm opinion that doesn't suit the liberal agenda.
And that's what's so concerning to me, is why are we censoring opinion pieces? You say your rants, that is definitely your voice, and your brand is this very fiery, very opinionated, very scathing voice, but it's not like you're making these things up. So you're writing, due diligence sourced opinion pieces what business does anyone have censoring that? And what do you think that we're looking at a lot more of this going forward?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know why I'm being targeted, and maybe like the Daily News bin, which I don't know if you've had the misfortune of happening upon that, that just regularly pumps out propaganda pieces for the neoliberal point of view. And there's no factual underpinnings at all to them, and they're not called opinion. But they seem to get a free pass. But someone who's writing opinion, and I'm clearly writing opinion, no one could ever dispute that. No one could think, go there and think, oh, there's a very even-handed, balanced point of view. I am usually tearing my hair out, or making jokes or whatever at the expense of people, but with very colourful headlines. And yet they do have a factual underpinning. I don't go and write just off my own steam. Like, I do a lot of research for each piece. Why is the eye of Sauron looking at me and not something as obviously fake news as, say, the Daily News bin?
Can you tell us a little bit more about Inquisitr? We might know. I don't know that much about it, but people watching might not know at all. Can you tell us more about the outlet and just how you got there? Maybe not how you got there, but just.
Oh, I think it's a good outlet. I think they've been unfairly targeted. I really think that they employ good journalists, vetted. They make sure that you have, you do due diligence on having a primary and two secondaries if you're going to write a hard news story, which I cannot say for the Washington Post, for instance. There is quite a high standard set at the Inquisitr, and I never found them to be overly editorializing us. It's an outlet where you publish and then they edit you live. And of course, if there's problems or whatever, then they go with that. But pretty much they let you decide let your news sense decide where to go. And especially working there as a hard news journalist, which I was for the most part at the start, I find them to be a really excellent outlet. And I thought they were unfairly targeted as well in that blacklist, which was only just the opinion of one person as well. That's the other weird thing. It was just the opinion, and it was fed to everyone as the hard truth. So there was fake news going around about fake news sites in this hall of mirrors.
I remember when those lists started breaking a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was about 3 weeks ago now, and interesting to see how people just immediately shared. Speaking of the responsible use of social media, as John was alluding to, I saw people that are, the farthest left progressives saying, oh, good, yes, this is important. We need to stop sharing fake news. And then, on that list was commondreams.org and Truthdig and Inquisitr and all these sites. And I didn't share any of them because it took me like 2 minutes to figure out that, oh, this is not a good list. That, this is the beginning of the crackdown on independent media. So,
Right.
yeah, it's a scary thing to me. I'm really glad that the outrage campaign worked this time. And actually, I wanted to ask you, Walker, because you're one of the people that I reached out to when this was breaking with Katie, and you said that you had reached out to Facebook, and I'm wondering if you got any response or any kind of feedback from them.
I actually didn't, although I have to say I was looking in my email to make sure that I didn't as this was going on. And I only sent that email wow, I sent it 5 days ago. I should have gotten something back. Yeah, no, I didn't get anything back. And usually Facebook is really good about getting back to us. We did a piece when all of the Bernie Sanders groups went down on Facebook. We did a piece about that, and we reached out to them and tried to ascertain what was going on, and they did get back to us. So I'm kind of surprised that I haven't heard anything.